This lovely creature is a Shoebill stork, and I got so obsessed with them I had to make a low poly model about them and then make a video where I say every single thing I know about them to you. Let's get started. And here we are, another day, modeling from the default cube in Blender. So to start my Shoebill stork model here, I'm basically just trying to do a very, very rough blocking of the side profile of a Shoebill stork. I'm not thinking at all about proportions or anything like that at this point, or even like the front view of the model and making sure it has any amount of depth or anything. I'm just trying to get a side profile, mostly because the Shoebill, like, I knew this model was going to be definitely a challenge because they have very curvy, like S-shaped necks, and those curvy shapes are definitely kind of a challenge for low poly, just because if you want a rounded shape for a 3D model, you're gonna have to add more cuts and more polys, and you could run the risk of not being so low poly after all. So I knew that was gonna be a challenge, but it turned out okay in the end. Okay, also I must say, the current state of this model reminds me of my new favorite creature ever that I just learned about, I think only a few days ago, from a hit tweet. Sea elephant! Look at this guy! Here's a picture where he looks sleepy. I think there's some type of mollusk. I really don't know anything about them. I don't even know if that's the actual name. That's just what I saw, like, I think in an auto translation on Twitter, but my Shoebill model in the current state reminds me of a sea elephant. So do with that what you will. So yeah, this early stage of the model, just trying to get the basic shape down. Questionable approach for extruding out the lower mandible. Kind of looks like that Aki screenshot right now. But I knew that I knew from the beginning that I do want to make this model into a VTuber at some point. Haven't gotten started on that quite yet, but someday in the future, when I have time, I do want to turn this into a Shoebill VTuber. But all that to say, so when I start a model and I know that I want it to be a VTuber, or even not necessarily a VTuber, but just a model that has a functional mouth or beak in this case for rigging purposes, I definitely try to start, like, all of the blocking and everything, I try to start with that in mind, because I don't know if it's just me, but I find that if I try to add, like, if I model my blocky little, like, Lego brick animal without a functional mouth, if I try and add that later on, I find it very difficult, especially if I'm like UV unwrapped and texture painted and everything. It's just an awful process, but I wanted to keep that in mind for this model, especially because, like, again, like I mentioned, Shoebills have that like very S-curve kind of neck shape, and it's very distinctive, and that also goes for their bill shape. A Shoebill's bill is a very unique shape. Like, it has that downward kind of curve you can see from the front and the side. It's also very wide, but the actual, like, the separation of the upper and lower jaw, like, it gives them that kind of smiley look. So they have a very distinctive mouth shape, and so I know if I want to make a VTuber of a Shoebill in the future, I need to be able to get the bill just right in order for it to really look like a Shoebill. So I wanted to make sure, at the very least, I just started kind of mentally preparing for having this opening and closing mouth. And you can see I extruded up on the back of the top back of the head section. You can see that little area, that little wisp that I extruded up and out. That is my wonderful Shoebill's crest feathers. They have what's called crest feathers, or it's also called crown feathers. Basically, it's just these little feathers that kind of stick up off the top of their head like a little curl of hair. It's very cartoonish. It's just adorable. Everything about Shoebills is so wonderful, but the crown feathers are especially cute. Shoebills, their crown feathers, they may have different kind of like hairstyles, quote, from day to day. They can kind of shift positions. So here are some different examples of my personal favorite Shoebill, Futaba. Kind of, there's like this classic like swept upward look that you see a lot. There's also kind of a bedhead or fluffy sort of look. And actually, it's funny, I mentioned Futaba and her wonderful crown feather hairstyles. Her name Futaba means, like, I think it's the Japanese word for sprout, And so she got this name because when she was a baby, when she was first brought to the bird garden where she lives now, there was a naming contest held, and basically visitors of the bird garden could send in submissions, and then everybody voted and one was picked, and the winning submission was Futaba because her little crown feathers when she was very young, they split apart in two different directions and looked like a little sprout on top of her head. So that's how she got her name, which I think is just adorable. Okay, so you can see now I'm extruding out some legs for my blocky Shoebill here. Bird legs are always really challenging for me. I think it's because they're like, at one time, they're so like thin and twiggy, but they're also really strong and they have to be able to support the weight of the bird. So I don't know, I find them challenging. Also the way that they bend, you know, backwards from our perspective, which I actually learned all about bird leg anatomy while I was working on this model. So I think you hear people say like flamingos have, you know, like backwards knees, kind of, their legs bend backwards more or less. I found out that that's actually like a bird's, it's the equivalent of like their ankle joint. And they actually have a knee joint that bends like ours, but it's just located much higher up in the body. It's not visible to us. It's much higher up and closer to their actual hip. So I'm very glad that I worked on this model and got to learn that. And here we have the end of day one, blocky Shoebill! Now you might see the screen and be thinking, Snoop Snorp, why are we starting over again? I promise we're not. I just added a cube to my scene because I basically wanted to just try and make like a separate model of the bill. I mentioned earlier that I know I want to turn my Shoebill model into a VTuber eventually, and because of that, it's really important to me that I get the distinctive bill shape correct and everything. The other part of that is the shape of the bill is so unusual, like it's flat on top but also curved kind of at the same time, and that's just from the front, and like the actual top of the bill has that downward slope and then everything slopes upward along the side. It's just kind of a complicated shape, or a more complicated shape than what I usually deal with low poly models. But all of that to say, the shape of the beak is just a lot more complicated than the rest of the body is going to be. So I figured since this area is likely going to be more detailed, how about we kind of work backwards? How about instead of the normal approach where I start from the body and slowly work my way toward the face of the animal, gradually adding more and more detail, how about I just start with that detailed piece of mesh and then build out the body once I have all that really detailed kind of complicated shape finished. Because like the bill, like it's flat, but it's not. It's curved in certain places, but also seems kind of flat. I don't know how to explain, but it was a very hard shape for me to conceptualize when I was modeling it early on. And I found this really great website called Skull Site. And basically it's just a website where they have lots of photos just like this. All three of the Shoebill skull references that you see on the screen here that I'm kind of switching between to model off of, those are all from Skull Site, and it's just this really wonderful resource where you can find great information about like bird anatomy and everything like that. And it's interesting, like, you know, it was great for figuring out the shape and everything, but also like you can kind of see I'm figuring it out here, like I'm kind of figuring out where the pivot point will be for this jaw when the Shoebill is actually animated and speaking as a VTuber later on. Originally, I thought the pivot point would just be kind of where the visible edge of the bill is along the side of the face, but that's actually not the case. You can see in those side profile photos of the skull that their bill, that lower mandible, is very much attached to more bone farther back along the head. Like if you the time lapse, so it's all moving very quickly, but you can kind of see that that lower mandible, it extends like all the way back under the eye socket and really kind of past the eye socket, and that's actually, as far as I know, that's actually where the lower mandible is moving from. So that was another big revelation for me, and I'm so glad that I, you know, started from this point instead of just building out the beak from the body like I normally do, because looking at these references, I wouldn't have known that without looking at these references, and if I hadn't kind of built the lower mandible the way that I did with that pivot point that's so far back, you know, kind of behind the eye socket in mind, I think animating it and everything would have been much harder and would have looked much worse. Another interesting thing that I learned in this process modeling my Shoebill was about something called glottis exposure. Fancy term, but I learned about this because of, I think it was a tweet or something was the original format I saw this in, but as hit tweets do, it's gotten passed around on every social media platform in different forms. But originally there was this post which said basically, oh, like pelicans do this weird thing sometimes where when they need to regulate their body temperature, they push their spine out through their mouth. They don't. That's not what... I went reading because shoebills do something very similar when they yawn, actually. There's lots of videos of shoebills yawning, and you can kind of see this bulge kind of come through the lower mandible, and it is their spinal column, but it is not to cool their body down or anything. So I read from a couple different sources about this. One of them was the Sauropod Vertebra blog, which was amazing and super informative. Like they even did, I think they did like a shoebill dissection at some point, like in the field. It was very cool, but basically they did a write-up about this exact post and how it is not accurate. So basically shoebills, they do something similar to pelicans when they yawn. They're both from the same family. They are very related to each other. But for shoebills, when they yawn, you can see their spine kind of bulge out through the lower mandible sometimes because their spine just literally doesn't have anywhere else to go when a shoebill yawns like that. Like, you know, you see a lot of photos of shoebills kind of resting that lower mandible on the front of their neck a lot of the time when they're just kind of hanging out and relaxed. And when they yawn, the spine just kind of pushes through the soft lower part of that bottom jaw that they have. But also for pelicans, so it's a little different for pelicans, but kind of the same principle. Like a pelican, of course, has a big pouch that a shoebill doesn't. And I got to read about this specifically with pelicans in a USA Today article. It's just available on their website, but they spoke with paleontologist Darren Naish. Not sure if I'm pronouncing their last name right, but basically they said that this is a behavior called glottis exposure, and it occurs when birds invert the pouch beneath their beak over their neck and chest, usually when they yawn. He said that pelicans will do this to basically sort of reset the position of their beak, of their pouch. Like it's more of a hygienic behavior, kind of a cleaning behavior. It has nothing to do with how they regulate their body temperature. Shoebills and pelicans both, if they are very hot and they need to cool down, they'll just pant like a dog would, and that's kind of how one of the ways that they can regulate their body temperature if it's very hot outside. And this is a great example of why we must always be critical of hit tweets, because what did OP mean? What do you mean they take their spine out when they need to cool off? Like, what is that in the most literal sense? What do you mean by that? Anyway, so you can see I've finished my beak retopology here. I'm really happy with the beak shape at this point. And now the big challenge is, how do I go from the bill to extruding out the rest of the body? In my mind, when I started this process, there would be no questions. It would be so straightforward. It would, in fact, be simple and easy. It wasn't. You can see here I am desperately adding more reference photos to my Blender scene in a desperate bid to save me from the current predicament, which is, oh my god, the topology of the beak is very complicated and not what I expect the topology of the rest of the body to look like. So now what do I do? You can basically see I just like selected the bottommost edge of the head just beneath the eye, and I just started extruding out a really basic shape. Like, I knew I wanted the face of my shoebill to have chubby cheeks like you see in the reference photos in the top left there. Shoebills, like, they can be very sleek and aerodynamic looking, and other times they can have these really cute little like smiley looking cheeks, and I want my Shoebill to look very friendly, and so I wanted them to have those like smiley, chubby little cheeks. So that I knew that was going to be like an important feature of the overall shape of the head. So I figured I would just kind of extrude out a really basic outline sort of for the head shape, and then just kind of try and go from there. So I knew that all I really needed to do was, once I got this outline for the face shape finished, I just needed to kind of connect vertices, just sort of fill in the gaps of geometry between the end of the bill and the beginning of the head shape. And that actually worked out really well. It was definitely a challenge, going from this somewhat straight on shape where the bill connects to the rest of the face into these rounded out cheeks. But it turned out really good, I think. I really like how it turned out, and like it was a good way to learn just a different kind of way of thinking. I usually use quads, which is any, just a shape with 4 vertices basically when we're talking about 3D modeling topology. I usually just work almost entirely in quads, but I just started using more triangles, which worked out really well for me here. So you can see the gray plane that I'm actually editing in the main viewport here. That is another retopology that I've started for the bill and the head. I liked the bill shape that I had so much, but I was struggling so very much to connect it into just a neck shape that could build out to the rest of the Shoebill's body. It was just really hard, and like, I don't know, I thought I wasn't gonna figure it out at all for a while there. I thought maybe I just messed up the topology of the bill too much, or the head when I, kind of built out from the bill. Like maybe I just did it so wrong that the model I had just wasn't gonna work. So I thought, okay, try another topology. And I tried to do that for a while, but I was going through caffeine withdrawals and I was just exhausted. So at this point, I gave up for a little bit. So at this point, I had already taken 5 days off from working on this model, looking at it, thinking about it, anything. I was really frustrated, but I really didn't have much of a choice because I needed to really finish this model so I could finish sticker designs for January Sneep Snorp Club rewards. So I just figured just get the body done no matter what. That's when I realized, hey, the topology of the original blocky Shoebill wasn't so bad after all, so why don't I just do a little low poly cosmetic surgery here? Why don't I just connect the body that I like onto the head that I like, my Shoebill? And that's exactly what I did. You can see me kind of rearranging things in the hierarchy, and I just used circle select to select all of the vertices of the blocky Shoebill's, just the bill really. I left the face pretty much intact. And then all I needed to do after that was really just combine the two objects. So select the new one and the old one, Control J to join them into one object so I can actually connect the vertices where I needed to. And that was the best realization I ever had for this model. Because like sometimes, you just get like bogged down thinking about stuff like that when you just cannot figure out the solution to a problem. But I have great news. Taking breaks is very smart, because when you come back, you just immediately realize the solution sometimes, and who doesn't love that? This was my first great realization of day 3 modeling my Shoebill. The second great realization was that instead of having this really challenging shape for the neck, why not just make the neck a bit more straight up, like you see in the reference that I have in the top left there. Shoebills aren't always resting their head on their neck. Sometimes it's a bit more straight out. So I figured, hey, how about for rigging purposes, we don't worry about making the model have that curvy S-shaped neck from the very beginning. We'll make a straight neck, and that way when we're rigging later, if we want the neck to be curved or straight up, we have the option when we actually do rigging. Amazing things happen when you take breaks while you're working. I'm a big advocate. So now you can see the big challenge is just figuring out how I can connect all of the vertices of the head on the old body onto the very last edge loop that exists on the new head that I made. And honestly, it wasn't that bad. Like, it was mostly trial and error. I had to just try different things and figure out what different shapes could I make in order to connect these two objects in a way that didn't have completely terrifying, you know, topology and everything. There was some questionable stuff every now and then. Like, I had to do a lot of reworking. Like, I just then in the time lapse, I had to do some merging of different vertices and lots of Control Z, lots of undoing as well, but that's okay. One of the things I always hear people say about Shoebills is that they look like Muppets, which I totally get. They have really expressive faces, they're very charismatic, and they do that like dance kind of thing. I think they look especially like Muppets when they're doing their little Shoebill dance, which I think they do. I haven't had a chance to read about it, but I think they do it like some kind of self-cleaning or hygienic behavior, because I always see like a ton of dust fly off of them when they do it. So I don't know, if anybody knows more in the comments, please share about the Shoebill dance. But the funny thing about people saying Shoebills look like Muppets is that one of the Muppets puppeteers, Bill Diamond, actually designed and made a Shoebill Muppet that's used. You can see in this photo here, that's the Shoebill puppet. It's actually used in helping hand rear Shoebill chicks. So this is a program, the first program of its kind. I think it might be probably the only one. I think this program only started in 2022. It's called the Shoebill Captive Rearing and Rehabilitation Facility. It was created by African Parks and Zambia's Department of National Parks and Wildlife. And basically it's part of their Shoebill management plan, which is their plan to help conserve and protect the species. Shoebills, they are a vulnerable species, unfortunately, so they do need extra protection of their environments and their nesting sites especially. But so this facility, it rehabilitates, I assume, adult Shoebills, but part of it too, the unique thing is that they are rearing Shoebill chicks in captivity. And this is so unique because, like, I think there's only been 2 instances, well, I think 2, but I think there actually are a few other instances of mated pairs of Shoebills successfully laying eggs and rearing chicks, like in zoos. I know one of them was in Belgium. I can't remember where the other one was. Oh, it was in Miami. It was Miami and Belgium. Anyway, so something that people bring up all the time about Shoebills, like, Shoebills get a bad rap. People love to talk about Shoebills like they're monsters, and that's actually a big part of why I started getting more interested in them and why I wanted to make this model, because there's just a lot of Shoebill slander out there. So one of the things people always love to bring up about Shoebills is, oh, Shoebills will have multiple chicks, but they, you know, the chicks will kill each other in the nest. And this is true, but I have such a problem with people moralizing the behaviors of wild animals. Shoebills don't do that because they're, you know, these vengeful, inherently evil beings. They do that because they're just wild animals and they're competing to survive. And, you know, obviously it's not what we'd hope to see. It's not a happy thing, but that's just how they are. They're wild animals and they're not doing something morally wrong. They're just surviving. But that is actually where this rehabilitation and chick rearing facility comes in. So they have a nest protection program as part of the Shoebill management plan. And as part of the Shoebill management plan, when a mated pair of Shoebills lays eggs, they'll lay 1 to 3 eggs per season in their nests. The rehab facility will actually confiscate the second and third, I assume if there's 3, they'll confiscate the second egg and they bring it to the rehab facility and they raise that second egg that most likely would have died in the wild against its sibling. They raise it in captivity so it can survive. They raise it, it says, until adolescence, and then they're released into the wetlands that they were born into as adolescents that can survive on their own. And I think that's so cool. And the amazing thing about that is that the Muppets puppeteer made this Shoebill puppet. So the puppet is actually used to imitate, like, the experience they would get in the wild, being fed by their parents, you know, being raised by their Shoebill parent. They do this so the chicks aren't in regular contact with humans, basically, so they can hopefully develop normally as they would in the wild and know how to protect themselves, avoid humans, stuff like that. It's really cool. And the other amazing thing about when I was looking for this story to tell y'all about it just a minute ago, I found out that there actually was a Shoebill Muppet on Jim Henson's animal show. There was Wingo the Shoebill. Amazing. So cute too. You can see here I did start experimenting with adding different colors to the Shoebill's eyes for the irises and the pupil. It didn't go the way I thought it might. And that'll actually be really interesting to work on when I do get to make this into a VTuber model, because for VTubers I definitely want there to be a distinct eye and, you know, cornea or iris, just so you can have better eye tracking and, you know, have more of a connection and be more personable as, you know, this non-human avatar. I definitely want there to be eye tracking, but the early drafts at least looked crazy. So we'll see. That'll be a unique challenge for another time, a future me. So we're doing a little bit more work here on the actual legs. You can see I have like this anatomy reference up in the top left right now. It's, I don't know, like these really beautiful detailed drawings of basically just a Shoebill skeleton, but the legs in particular, the different like joints of the legs, like I was talking about before with like their, you know, quote backwards knees being more like an ankle, really detailed drawings about all of that. And like, granted, I'm not worried about musculature per se, but it always, even with a low detail model, it really, really helps to have, you know, as much of an idea as you can about what the actual bone structure looks like. Like right here, especially for the actual toes and claws of our Shoebill, you can see you can kind of see in the reference that they have like a kind of like a bump sort of on the bottom side of each of their toes, and it's really pronounced. If you see, like if you look at a photo of a Shoebill, you can really see that on their feet. Not sure, I'm sure that little like bump thing on the underside of their foot, I'm sure those have a name, not sure what it is, but you can see here for the toes, it was actually really simple. I'm very proud of the feet. I used to struggle really a lot with creating feet for birds or anything that really had like claws and talons. It was really hard for me to understand how that shape comes out of just, you know, like a straight on leg shape, but now it feels like I can do that relatively easily, which is really nice. One thing I also really like about this model was the legs are a completely separate mesh from the body, so that means that I can have a different outline color for their actual like scaly legs and their blue-gray feathers, which is really nice. That's something I struggled with a little bit on this model too, was trying to figure out how I could get different outline colors. Like when I started making this video, I did revisit that a couple times and I watched tons and tons of tutorials. I was reading posts all over like the Blender GitHub, all this different stuff. GitHub, Stack Exchange, what am I talking about? Threads in the Blender Stack Exchange about doing outlines in freestyle mode, which is something people ask me all the time about how I do outlines on my models, and my answer is always the same. I use a wonderful free add-on called Outline Helper by Feline Entity. It's free on Gumroad. But another way you can create outlines for your model is using Freestyle. I haven't used Freestyle yet. It seems like there's a lot of different things that you can do, like outlines are just one small part of it, but Freestyle does give you like tons and tons of options for different ways to control like the thickness of your outline, different colors. Do you want it to be broken up in certain places? Like, do you want it to kind of look, you know, more illustrated, like kind of a dotted line maybe? And all of that's great, and it would be a way to actually create different outline colors for one piece of mesh. Like if I didn't want to separate the Shoebill's beak from the body, which I definitely don't want to do. I want all of it to move as one piece when it is rigged at some point. But if I wanted to keep all of the body one mesh, I would be able to create different outlines using freestyle mode. Basically, I would just have to create like different materials and assign a different outline color to the different materials. And that's all great. And it was working. I spent like, you know, a little bit of time kind of playing with it and figuring out, but the only downside really of freestyle is that it is a really slow process. As far as I know, you might be able to view what you're doing in freestyle in real time, maybe with the compositor. I'm not sure though. You probably can, but I didn't take the time to figure it out for the sake of this model. But yeah, it's something I definitely want to look into when I do more with this model later, especially like making a VTuber and stuff. I'd really like to have a specific orange color for the bill. So you can see I do have separate pieces of mesh for the wings of our Shoebill right now. I did that for a reason, I'm sure. I'm not totally sure why now. I think it was just because I wanted them to kind of, you know, stand out from the rest of the body a bit more. Like when you look at reference photos of Shoebills standing around, like their wings, of course, I mean, they're huge birds. I think they can grow to at least be 5 feet tall. Very large birds, so their wingspan is of course just absolutely massive. So when they have their wings folded when they're not using them, you can see that they're really big, and you know, they add a lot of bulk to the sides of a Shoebill, and they also kind of like hang down, like the tips of their primary flight feathers kind of hang down below their tail feathers a little bit. So I did want to make the wings a little bit more distinct, but I ended up not liking how that looked, so the separate wings don't hang around for very long. Some of the other major changes I've made at this point to the model are changing the colors of the legs, and now I'm adding some different materials to also kind of just break up the monotony of a 100% blue bird. I added some lighter coloring around the legs and the tummy and the neck just to give a little bit more visual interest, but I did make the legs more of a gray. They were originally yellow. I don't know why that is, why I default to yellow legs for a bird where the legs are clearly like a gray scaly color. I don't know what that's all about. And here we have day 3 Shoebill. And now it's time for UV unwrapping. UV unwrapping really isn't that complicated for a model like this. You know, low poly models, if I'm going to texture paint, for a model like this where I'm just trying to get the model done at this point for a sticker design, I'm mostly just UV unwrapping so that I can texture paint in specific areas. That's all I'm really thinking about with texture painting, or excuse me, the UV unwrapping at this stage for a model like this. Again, this is for a sticker design, so if it were a VTuber, if it were a game asset, the UV maps would certainly be better, more organized. But for something like this, again, very simple. So I'm basically just marking seams wherever I know I want to have the surface of the mesh that's going to be painted on, and I want to make sure that when I unwrap that section and start arranging the UV map, I just want to make sure that all of those important sections that I want to paint on can be large enough on the UV map that they won't be pixelated when I actually paint on them later. So that's really all I'm thinking about when I'm UV unwrapping a model like this that I'm just finishing up for a sticker design. So you can see I've gone ahead and marked seams on the bill and around the eye, just because for the eye, I usually like to outline the eye with a lighter color just to kind of emphasize the eye a little bit more. And I also marked seams along the neck and the chest of the Shoebill because I'd like to paint some little feather details here and there. I brought my favorite side reference, my favorite reference photo back to compare with my model again, because I wanted to make sure that I was getting the dimensions as correct as possible before I start actually arranging my UV map and everything. So you can always make adjustments to your 3D model at any time, really. there just may be times when you adjust it where it will be way more work than other times. So for something like this, where I'm getting ready to UV unwrap everything, I want to make sure that the geometry and the proportions of the model, everything is as close as the final product that I can get it to be. So I always know that I'm gonna have to make some little changes here and there, but the closer I can get it to the finished product at this stage, the better. Because really, like, again, you can make changes at any time, but the thing is, once you start UV unwrapping, you start texture painting. When you're texture painting, if you need to alter the actual geometry of your model, if you need to move pieces of the mesh around, that texture isn't going to change with your model. If there's a way around that, please let me know in the comments. I would love to learn about that. But as far as I know, you know, there's no way to make the texture kind of rearrange itself when you start changing the actual topology of the model. So I recommend finalizing the actual geometry of your model as much as possible before you start texture painting. Again, you can always redo it, but it's not fun. Especially with models that have, like, any animal models that have, like, really detailed coat patterns or feather patterns and stuff. I was, like, you'll see at one point in the texture painting later on, I was thinking about trying to paint on some of the Shoebill's feathers. Like, you can see in that reference photo in the top left that they have these beautiful feathers that are this grayish blue color, and a lot of the feathers have kind of like a white outline around the edges. They're really pretty. It's a detail that I would love to incorporate, but not today. Another time. One of my absolute favorite things that I came across in preparation for this video while I was looking online for more public domain images and research about Shoebills that I could tell y'all about, I went to the Library of Congress's website and I just searched Shoebill STORK. I wasn't expecting much, but I was blown away by the sheer volume of scanned newspapers that had stories containing references to Shoebills, whether they were columns or announcements about different zoos that had acquired specimens. You just wouldn't believe it. I want to read one of them to you. This is from 1925. It's a column about a Shoebill by Mary Graham Bonner, and it came with this wonderful illustration of Miss Shoebill saying, "I'm a lovely looking thing." So this is the column. "Well, my name is Miss Shoebill. It doesn't mean that I send bills for shoes or that I'm telling anyone named Bill to shoo away. Nor does it mean that my bill looks just exactly like a shoe, though it does look rather strange, I will admit. Yes, I'm curious looking, I have gray feathers, and my home used to be in Egypt. I'm a lovely looking thing in my own opinion, but few others agree with me. They think I'm about as much of a sight as a creature can be, and they don't mean a handsome sight. I'm a large bird, a member of the stork family." This isn't true, they're not part of the stork family, but that's okay. And then the column continues. "Well," said Miss Shoebill, as she looked at, and then the column continues. "Well," said Miss Shoebill, as she looked down upon the swan family swimming along, "you're a good deal more graceful than I am, but you haven't funny faces. Now I've a funny face. Of course, I said I thought I was lovely looking, but between friends that was only a joke. I know I'm funny looking, but it cheers people up. Now I am a new arrival at the zoo, and they come here and see me, and how they do laugh. It is not everyone who would be willing to cause amusement by having just the kind of face I have. No, they would not all be so willing. I don't believe in too much worry. I'm not bothering about my appearance or whether I always look as neatly as I might, but you don't go in for too many frills either." And Miss Shoebill continues, "But I'm just as glad. I'd hate to have to live up to a beautiful reputation. It would be such a nuisance and such a bother. Ah, I can't talk anymore. Why? Well, for the moment I've nothing else to say. You didn't think I'd say that, did you? Well, the Shoebill is a surprise in more ways than one. It is really a surprise to many that there is a creature such as I am. But here I am. No one can deny it." And I just love that. I loved it when I first came across it in the Library of Congress archives, and I love it just as much now when I'm reading it to y'all. I think it's just so sweet and lovely. I just adore it. Another funny thing that I read in a different newspaper article, I'm not sure what year this article was published, but Some of the other newspaper scans that I read from Library of Congress noted that the first Shoebill specimens that arrived in England arrived in 1860, and then the next Shoebills that arrived in England arrived around 1900, but instead of bringing adult Shoebills, they brought 2 Shoebill eggs, and they brought no adult Shoebills to rear them, so they incubated the Shoebill eggs using hens. I don't know exactly how big a Shoebill egg is, but I can guess, and I can guess that a hen did not know what to do with an egg the size of a Shoebill. Yeah. So here in the texture painting, I'm adding a couple little different details to the texture here. I wasn't gonna model feathers. I don't usually model little details like that, except of course I did model crown feathers for my Shoebill because crown feathers are so cute. They need to have them, and they needed to have plenty of them so I can pose them in all the different hairstyles Shoebills have. But yeah, so I just painted on a few details, like I just wanted there to be a little bit of differentiation between the neck and the chest, so I used a lighter color when I was texture painting and just painted on the suggestion of a few feathers on the chest. And you can see in that reference in the top left that Shoebills actually do have like this interesting bit of feathers kind of around like their neck, the bottom of their neck, top of their chest. These feathers that kind of hang down, like they look like a scarf or something almost. I don't know. Like I just kind of drew those feathers just to have them there, but they actually do have cute little feathers like that. There's just much more of them and they're much smaller, and I wasn't about to paint all that, so mine look a little different. Okay, and now you can see me try and paint on a couple of feathers. There's a few different ideas here. This was ultimately abandoned. Again, I don't thrive painting small details onto models, so there we go. One giant brush stroke is the key instead. So you can see here, instead I decided to just take a darker color for the wings and just kind of create the general shape of their folded wings. And I would have liked for the wings to hang down a little bit more past the tail feathers, kind of like actual Shoebill wings do when their wings are folded, but that would have meant that I would need to extrude out some wings and everything, and it's just a little bit too much detail for the actual model at this point when I'm just trying to get the model done for sticker designs at this point. Later there will be more detail, but not right now. I started working on exporting sticker designs and I noticed something about the eye placement. It is wrong, is what I noticed. So that's something that I had to fix. You can see I'm just trying to adjust the placement of the actual eye itself within the same face where the eye was originally placed. And that worked out okay, but you can see in that reference photo that their eyes are actually really, really high up and pretty close to the actual edge of their bill. So just sliding the eye around unfortunately wasn't going to be enough. I would definitely have to actually adjust the topology a bit to get it right where I want it to be, where you can see it right now, where the eye looks perfect, immaculate. I would have to actually change the geometry a little bit, so I'm just getting rid of some edges here and getting ready to use the knife tool to add some new cuts in different places. It did work. It did turn out okay, I will say. In the end, it did turn out okay, but at the moment when it happened, it was very scary and devastating. But it did turn out okay. The eyes are a unique challenge for the Shoebill because, you know, they have these, oh, you can see in all the reference photos, their eyes are so amazing. They have these wonderful eyes that are very forward facing, but at the same time, when you look at a Shoebill from the side, they kind of look almost like they face out to the sides a little bit, but of course they don't. They are very much forward facing, so I had to adjust the geometry a little bit, but not the end of the world. Much worse things can happen at this point with a 3D model, so not the worst thing in the world at all. And now we have day 4 Shoebill. And here we are, the dawn of the final day, and it is time for rigging and animating a Shoebill. So for rigging and animation, I usually don't include this in time lapses because I think it's just kind of maybe boring and unhelpful to view in like time-lapse form, but I've had a couple people ask me to include it in my time lapses, so here it is. Yeah, my rigging process for this model is very, very simple. Just a couple bones, just generally following the contour of the neck at points where I know I want to be able to rotate the body, because I knew really the only animation I was going for this model was just kind of their little Shoebill bow that they do. If you haven't seen it, Shoebills, they bow to each other. Actually, I don't know if I know the most accurate reason to describe why Shoebills bow. I can tell you what is not an accurate reason, which is what someone tried to tell me on Twitter, which was that I think it was like a Shoebill at a zoo in Japan was doing it, and a video of that went viral, and so people started doing that, started bowing to Shoebills, you know, all over the world. So Shoebills just kind of picked it up. That is absolutely not what happened at all. It is just a behavior Shoebills have always had. It's probably just kind of a social behavior. Like when I read about why Shoebills bow, pretty much what I read every time was that Shoebills will bow to one another if they're friendly. So it's kind of a gesture of like, you know, I am a safe Shoebill. Shoebills are very solitary birds is how I hear them described a lot of the time. Shoebills generally do not seek out the company of other Shoebills. And that was another funny thing that I read in those library scans from the Library of Congress, was there was like some news article, I don't remember what year it was for this one, it was probably like, you know, early 1900s again, but there was some story about, some explorer or whatever wrote about going to see the Shoebills around the Nile in Africa, trying to go find Shoebills, and he wrote that Shoebills, like, you could see them in flocks of 75 or 100, and then they'd all, if you scared them, they'd all fly up into the trees and perch and hide in the trees. And I feel extremely confident that that never happened. Shoebills, again, are extremely solitary animals. They do not generally enjoy the company of each other. Even mated pairs of Shoebills, as far as I know, Shoebills do mate for life like a lot of birds do. But I read that even mated pairs of Shoebills, they generally are not around each other very much, except for like breeding season and nesting purposes. Otherwise, they pretty much want to be on their own. And you can see that behavior. Probably the same is true. That's, you know, probably also maybe why Shoebill chicks are particularly so competitive with each other, is just that, I don't know why they're so solitary. But yeah, so Shoebills bow to indicate to one another, as far as I know, that they're friendly, basically, that, you know, it's a sign that they're not going to hurt each other or something like that. But it's kind of a social behavior. So you can see lots of videos of Shoebills. Shoebills will bow at humans if humans bow and kind of shake their heads from side to side the way Shoebills do. I've seen it in many, many videos in zoos. Caretakers will go up to their Shoebills, and sometimes Shoebills that really seem to love their caretakers, like Futaba, my favorite Shoebill, in all the videos of her in her enclosure, whenever she realizes her favorite caretaker is coming to like feed her or whatever, you can kind of see her start to listen, and she'll start bowing and nodding her head over and over again before he's even visible. She'll go and start greeting him like that, which it's just like the sweetest thing I've ever seen. Again, Shoebills are so charismatic and just have so much personality. How could you not adore them? But yeah, again, so I was talking about the bowing. They are known to bow to their caretakers and stuff like that. I'm sure, you know, if it were a wild Shoebill, of course, leave it alone. Don't go bother it. But for Shoebills in captivity, they are known to bow to humans, and I actually got to experience this. There are a couple Shoebills at the Dallas World Aquarium in Dallas, Texas. They have, I think 2 or 3 Shoebills, I'm not totally sure, in one of the enclosures at the very beginning of the aquarium there, and there's a heat lamp kind of in the like ticketing area, and the shoebills will come up to that heat lamp sometimes in the winter, and they'll stand sort of near it, but they're within their enclosure, of course. There's a fence, but they can still feel the heat of the lamp, so they'll kind of hang out there. And at the end of our aquarium visit, around, I guess it was Thanksgiving of this past year, around Thanksgiving, we went to the aquarium and we missed the shoebills somehow at the very beginning of our visit, so we had to loop around and go see them at the very end. And sure enough, a shoebill was just standing in their enclosure near where the heat lamp was, and they kind of turned around when they saw us, like they were kind of interested, or I don't know. But we stood there and I bowed to the shoebill a couple times, and they actually bowed back. I bowed a few times. I thought nothing was gonna happen, but I did it again, and the shoebill, just like in my animation, bowed their head and they wagged their head around. And then it was so amazing when they came back up at the end of their bow. They did they clattered their beak, which is the shoebills don't vocalize very much. They can, I've heard videos of it, but not very much. Mostly to make noise, shoebills repeatedly open and close their bill really hard, and it makes a clattering noise. I don't know how else to describe it. You can find lots of videos of it here on YouTube. You can hear it. Actually, I'll play a clip of it after, toward the end of this video, so you can hear it. But they did that. They bowed, and then they clattered their beak, and then they laid down on the ground. It was the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my entire life. And now we have an animated shoebill. I want to say a huge thank you to members of Sneep Snorp Club for supporting the channel and everything that I make. By the time this video publishes, my Shoebill papercraft patterns and Shoebill stickers will be available for the $5 and $10 tiers. There's tons of bonus content in Sneep Snorp Club, from paper crafts, behind the scenes, art journal posts, monthly live streams, and so much more. I'm working on getting ad-free versions of my YouTube videos on there right now, but if you'd like to get exclusive content from me and to support my work, you can find a link to Sneep Snorp Club in the description below.